Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to our Insider Insight Show. I'm honored to have back with me someone I consider a friend and someone who is the most courageous person that I've ever come in contact with, Bob Mazur. A little background for those of you not familiar with Bob. He is, he's a legend in so many different worlds. He's actually a legend in the underworld. Is probably one of the most wanted people that they want to get their hands on, because he's exposed the core, the roots of the drug cartels, the money laundering operation that feeds these organizations and what keeps them alive and growing. And he's definitely on their list as being most wanted, because he goes after what keeps them growing and keeps them in business. A little background on Bob Mazur. He's earned global acclaim as one of the world's leading experts on the financial escapades of the underworld. There is no one with more first-hand knowledge about how international banks and businesses cater to those who own the nearly $2 trillion in criminal proceeds laundered annually. For years, in the eyes of organized crime, Bob was a highly successful mob-connected money launderer that helped manage their illicit fortunes. His clients, some of the most famous and deadly drug cartel bosses, including Pablo Escobar, offered a $500,000 price tag on Bob's head when arrests were made around the world when he was revealed to be a highly trained U.S. federal undercover agent. Bob is the author of my favorite book, and also which is the background for my favorite movie, all the same name, The Infiltrator. It's a memoir about Bob's undercover life, much of which was spent acting as a conduit between the ruthless drug barons and corrupt, legitimate-appearing senior executives that cleaned billions in blood-stained money through otherwise international banks and businesses. Bob has transformed his underworld experience and current-day involvement in the money laundering field into a remarkable lesson for today's business sector. After completing a highly decorated 27-year career as a federal agent in 3 U.S. federal agencies, Bob is now president of KYC Solutions, a firm that provides speaking, expert witness, and consulting services to companies worldwide. Bob's book, The Infiltrator, is available in 10 languages in more than 50 countries, and the basis for the internationally acclaimed movie, as I mentioned before, my favorite movie, starring Bryan Cranston, Diane Kruger, and many other internationally known cast members. The name of the movie is called The Infiltrator. You can get more information on the book, the movie, Bob's writings, Bob's activities at Robert Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, robertmazur.com. Bob, welcome back to the Operation Freedom platform and our Insider Insight Show.
Oh, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
So, Bob, you recently wrote a fantastic article, which we also featured on the website, entitled FinCEN Files Confirm the Elephant in the Room. So let's dissect your title. First of all, FinCEN and the files. Educate our listeners on FinCEN and the files you're speaking about.
Sure. Well, FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It's really the U.S. Financial Intelligence Unit. Most nations around the world have intelligence units that analyze data that's supplied to them by banks within their country to make sure or to attempt to make sure that there's no illicit use of the banking system to combat money laundering and other financial related crimes. So the FinCEN files, though, came about. I first learned about them a couple of months ago from reporters of BuzzFeed who contacted me and said that they were in possession of a couple of thousand suspicious activity reports. Now, these are can be very, very sensitive documents. Suspicious activity reports are filed by financial institutions when they notice a pattern of activity or even a transaction that it appears to them is suspicious as it relates to potentially being involved in illicit activity. And so in this case, normally those documents are never available. Mm-hmm. They go into this black hole called FinCEN that we hope is doing the right thing by analyzing them properly. They get untold numbers of suspicious activity reports and other financial reports like currency transaction reports filed by financial institutions. And I can tell you, I was a witness in a case probably 4 or 5 years ago, and there was no doubt in my mind that there were suspicious activity reports that had been filed, which I think would have been probative of the facts that the jury was going to analyze. And the court said, no, you can't do it. You're not allowed to get those documents. So when BuzzFeed received, through one form or another, more than 2,000 SARs, they analyzed them, and what they showed was very, very startling, concerning to me. When I was contacted, the first thing I did is I said, well, I certainly like to make sure that the public has the truth, but I first want to talk to my counsel and make sure that whatever it is that I do in the way of assisting isn't going to constitute a crime, and isn't going to undermine anything that might be underway in an active investigation of some sort that was being pursued. Most of the documents that I was offered access to, or the information I was offered access to, related to as far along as 17 years ago. The most recent transaction was within the last 5 years. So the position that we took was that we didn't feel as though that there was anything, if there was anything that related to national security, one would hope, I think the most recent one was 3 years ago, one would hope that in 3 years someone would act on it. And hopefully, right. and hopefully I wasn't creating a problem. There was a little bit of a chilling effect. FinCEN sent notice to BuzzFeed and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And that is a remarkable organization that has, I think, roughly 400 investigative journalists around the globe who work together to unearth truth and provide it to the public so that they can find out, they can see what it is that's really going on in various matters. They reported on things like the Panama Papers, where someone hacked into Mossack Fonseca's law firm in Panama, and again told the world, the elephant in the room, that the Panamanian corporation formation was being done to facilitate the hiding of illicit funds being sent around the world. And the Paradise Papers did the same type of thing. These are all things. There was also an IT specialist with HSBC who provided to the world documents that related to a global conspiracy concerning the evasion of income taxes. And so in that same spirit, these records were looked at in an effort to try to give the public and give those responsible in oversight the opportunity to see the truth of whether or not these things are being followed up on. And what I saw, and I have to say, of the 2,000 plus, I was given information about 14 suspicious activity reports, but those involve hundreds of pages. So it took me more than a week to analyze the records that I looked at. And what I saw was startling in several ways. Startling in a way that, one, they speak to an issue of to what degree, when is it the responsibility of a financial institution to not just send in suspicious activity reports that say, hey, we think there's criminal activity going on here, but when should the corporate integrity bell ring and someone say, shut that account down. We're not going to be involved in this. This looks like it's dirty money. The other question that it raises is, to what extent are sufficient resources and adequate focus being provided by FinCEN in the analysis of these records? Because from my standpoint, when I looked at what I was given, and that related to the movement of $45 billion, that's with a B, $45 billion in suspicious activity reports relating to the movement of funds coming out of principally Russia, going through a series of accounts that were set up in shell companies for transactions that on their face appear to have no business purpose whatsoever. And when one tried to investigate whether or not the company was a real company, you couldn't find any information about it. It was smoke and mirrors, basically, which, I can go through the litany of things that I saw. But for example, there was no apparent economic business or lawful purpose of transactions. Counterparties, that is, the parties that were either sending or receiving back and forth, were formed in the name of nominee companies in high-risk jurisdictions like BVI, Cyprus, Panama, shekels. The entities were formed in countries that were not the same countries in which the entities either maintained bank accounts or did business. The officers and directors were also officers and directors of hundreds of companies. The addresses of the companies were the same as addresses for hundreds of other similar shell-like companies. Funds were transferred in large round amounts, oftentimes on multiple occasions in a single day, to the same company.
Bob, tell me if I'm wrong, but that seems awfully sloppy, doesn't it?
It does seem sloppy, but when you're moving the amount of money that was moved in this case, what those SARs related to was the movement of, I saw $45 billion. Right. It was 671. Oh no, it was far, far more than the $45 billion that I looked at. One particular company jumped out. It's a company called Ask Trading. And Ask Trading purported to be involved in billions of dollars in transactions and having, according to its website, 200 employees, and dealing in investments and trade transactions basically for individual or for entities in Russia looking to invest in the Far East. But when BuzzFeed went to Singapore, where Ask Trading is located, what they found were a few empty cubicles, a group of offices. The door didn't even have the name of Ask or its affiliated companies with it, and it was one of those you rent it locations where there's one secretary in the middle of a big circle of offices. And clearly, there's no way that company could have possibly been involved in those billions of dollars of transactions that allegedly had occurred. So let's see, between 2001 and 2016, it managed to move $671 million in transactions through Deutsche Bank, J.P. Morgan Chase, and Bank of New York Mellon. $4 million to a UAE, United Arab Emirates-based company, claiming to be a transaction related to construction materials, but the government later said that the company that they were transacting with was part of an organization financing drug cartels and terrorist organizations such as the Taliban. One person clearly associated with the company was a Russian-born entrepreneur. Glazov is his last name. His apartment, a 3-story walk-up in Singapore, was one of the office addresses for Ask Trading that handled this massive amount of monies being moved out of Russia. One group of transactions alone by Ask, they did $27.1 million worth of transactions based upon one invoice number, allegedly related to the purchase of fluorescent light bulbs.
No.
Yeah. There's a thing called the Center for Advanced Defense Studies that looks closely into the public databases for Russian customs data, and Ask, it was not there as an entity that had sent any shipment, let alone $27.1 million worth of fluorescent bulbs back to Russia. So the startling thing for me is, if this is so obvious, if BuzzFeed and the reporters who, although they have talent, they certainly, you would hope that our government agents that get this information would have more resources and more capability than BuzzFeed's investigative journalists. Why does this continue to occur without any action being taken, especially at a time when you must know that certainly out of Russia and other countries, there are efforts to undermine free and fair elections around the world.
True.
Not just in any one country, but in many different countries, because they want to promote what they want to promote. And the only way you can do that is with money. And how is it that we have these billions of dollars that are flying out of Russia, being handled in shell companies with obvious profiles that involve not just suspicious activity, but it's hard to imagine that it's not clearly criminal activity that's occurring. And the other thing that's really troubling to me, in a sense, is I know that we don't even begin to understand the number of pieces of paper that are out there being filed by banks concerning the trillions of dollars a day that are moved through the wiring systems. But the compliance departments of banks that file these reports basically are filing information about what their sales people are doing within their own institution.
Right.
And for those people who are account relationship managers involved in the sales side for banking, bringing in deposits, one has to recognize that their salaries are directly related to the amount of deposits that they can attract to be deposited and transferred through the institution that they represent. So they're going to stay pretty close to figuring out what kind of activity their big accounts are handling. You can't tell me that some of these people on the account relationship side have no knowledge that this activity is involving the movement of illicit funds. In my opinion, and it's just my opinion, it would seem to me that one or more people within the institution moving this type of money with this profile would have to know that the underlying facts involve the movement of funds that relate to criminal conduct.
Well, in fact, Bob, when you infiltrated the Medellin drug cartel and a number of different other organizations, when you busted these people, didn't they tell you, hey, why you busted me? I'm just doing what everybody else is doing. I mean, and they didn't say, okay, I didn't do this. I mean, am I wrong on that?
No, you're right. And that goes back to the prosecution of officers and the financial institution formerly known as the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI. And, the New York Times ran a front page or a front cover story about the sleaziest bank in the world being BCCI, and everybody saying that they were an anomaly. But when I got the opportunity to, after prosecution of senior officers, be part of a debriefing team, I sat there with them with orange jumpsuits on behind bars, I got a different story. I mean, their story was, listen, you don't think we started our careers with BCCI, do you? No, I worked at this bank, I worked at this bank, I worked at that bank. We simply took what we thought were the best techniques that we had learned through our banking careers and applied them at BCCI. And no doubt they were a little more aggressive, a little more high profile than some, but their conduct, you can look at the many, and there are dozens of deferred prosecution agreements that have been entered into between the United States and major financial institutions around the world in the last 10 years, all admitting to their involvement in criminal activity, whether it's because of conspiring to evade income taxes for the wealthiest of the wealthy, whether it's moving drug money, whether it's attempting to, well, not just attempting, successfully circumventing the prohibition of dealing with Iran in sanction and other sanctioned nations, pilfering treasuries, doing all types of facilitating all types of criminal activity. It is clear from those deferred prosecution agreements that this is much more common than the international banking community would like to admit it really is. Oftentimes what you'll find is that senior management in these cases says, we're talking about transactions that happened 2 and 3 years ago. We cleaned house. We really had faulty artificial intelligence and software programs.
Well, it's hard to prosecute AI, right?
It sure is.
Right.
Okay, let's stick that disk in the prison cell because that's right. The failed software. No, I mean we'll continue to have these types of problems forever unless we are willing to, every single time these types of things happen, dig deeply to determine who are the individuals who are responsible for these transactions and hold them responsible. Paying fines is a cost of doing business. It is not going to stop this type of activity. And the elephant in the room for me is the clear evidence that, based upon the analysis of the United Nations on Drugs and Crime, who, through their collective efforts of the various member nations, analyze the movement of illicit funds annually, they determine that roughly $2 trillion a year in funds are seeking money laundering services, that they are associated with illicit activity. And $400 billion of that, roughly, is from the sale of illegal drugs. Now, if you look at the Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture website and really drill into the numbers, impossible that the U.S. government, or even all governments collected together, find even 2% of the revenue from the sale of illegal drugs. So with these criminal organizations being able to have treasuries that flourish, they can exponentially grow every single year and have greater and greater influence on stealing democracy from the free world. You can look around and see things that are going on in many nations, including ours at times, unfortunately. I have a former partner who went to prison for 10 years because he was corrupt. Corruption knows all nationalities. We see some things that are going on in Mexico and Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Venezuela, many nations in Africa. They are undermining, the criminal organizations are undermining the integrity of otherwise free governments that would be representing all the people. And it's a critical thing that needs to be addressed yesterday.
Bob, when you were the quarterback of the team that infiltrated the Medellin drug cartel and you ran your operation, people ultimately went to jail. However, Bob, and maybe I'm just way off on this, but when I see banks doing these deferred prosecution agreements now, and you mentioned this, they pay a fine and it's a fraction of whatever money they laundered through. The most recent thing in the precious metals market with JP Morgan Chase, they paid $1 billion fine. But nobody ends up like what ended up in your operation, guys in jumpsuits behind bars. Nobody, at least to my knowledge of late, by late I mean last 5-10 years, ends up that's running a principal in these banking syndicates ends up in an orange jumpsuit behind bars, like what you did to the banksters from BCCI. Am I wrong on that?
No, the only time that I've seen in the recent past where we've had minimal jail sentences handed out to bankers has been in connection with their involvement in tax conspiracies, where they conspire with extraordinarily wealthy people. I don't know how many thousands in the United States have come in and confessed to the Department of Justice because they were given an opportunity to come in and make sure that if they had foreign accounts that they were using to hide monies and evade taxes, if they came in and made a full and voluntary disclosure, they had to pay some excess fines. There was an extra 20% over the fines and penalties, but they were able to get right with the IRS. But in the process of doing that, luckily, the Department of Justice Tax Division debriefed every single one of those people who came in and confessed, and they collected the data so that they could see, okay, who are the officers at these banks who have been doing this? And they found these patterns of people who were consistently involved in it. And so they did prosecute several of them in tax evasion cases. Now, keep in mind, when you're talking about tax evasion conspiracies, that, if it's successful, takes money out of government treasuries. And therefore, the government is very, very interested in making sure that people stop that, because they need that money in order to be able to operate the government. I find it just unusual that cases that involve, for example, the HSBC matter in 2012, cases that involve drug activity, where monies are coming into banks from outside sources and increasing deposits in dollar accounts, seem to be not as aggressively looked at as I think as officers have been in tax conspiracies. In the HSBC matter, and I urge your listeners to just Google HSBC Senate Subcommittee, Senator Levin. He led a subcommittee that looked into the HSBC matter. It's more than 300 pages, but in the first 25, you can get to read all of the criminal conduct that they identified. It's just disgusting. And the bottom line out of all of that is HSBC paid a $1.92 billion fine. Now, where was the drug money coming from that was being deposited there? Well, it was actually correspondent banking of HSBC. They opened up accounts for what's called casas de cambio, houses of exchange, in Mexico. Well, where was the greatest activity coming from? Oh, the state of Sinaloa, where then we go further. What city? Oh, Culiacan. Oh, the same city that all of the cartel, the Sinaloa cartel leaders are from. Isn't that interesting? And the bank, in order to help the customers, for the customers to be able to bring this money in so that it wasn't obvious, the customers who brought the cash in brought it in carved boxes that fit perfectly inside the opening of the HSBC teller window. And during a wiretap in Mexico of a major trafficker, he was picked up saying, the best place to launder money is HSBC. Well, what happened with that? Unfortunately, that was given to the regulatory people in Mexico, and instead of being pursued covertly in a criminal investigation, we have, a regulatory research into it. But, those Casa de Cambio accounts were acquired, many of them were acquired from Wachovia Bank a few years before, when Wachovia Bank, banking with some of those same accounts, was in itself entered into a deferred prosecution agreement and sold that business off, and HSBC got it. And before Wachovia got it, Union Bank of California, which pled guilty, which signed a deferred prosecution agreement, was dealing with those same accounts. So they got passed from Union Bank of California to Wachovia to HSBC, and you know what? They're still out there, and they're still being handled by other banks. And like I say, I think until individual responsibility becomes an extremely high priority for the U.S. government and all governments in the prosecution of money laundering, this is never going to change.
Well, that's the sad part. Bob, when you looked at these FinCEN files and these suspicious activity reports, when you looked at the files, did they have, if you will, a status of investigation timeline going on? Or, so for example, suspicious activity report file here. Here is what we, the Treasury, have done, A, B, and C, and here's where we are in D. Was there any indication of that type of process occurring, or was it just, suspicious activity report filed, black hole, suspicious activity report filed, black hole?
Well, the suspicious activity report is a one-way discussion by the financial institution to FinCEN, saying to them, this is what we see. We believe that this could be related to illicit activity. Here's the account name. Here's the underlying information that we have. And as compliance officers, and I've spoken to thousands of them around the world, say to me, they fill out these suspicious activity reports, they send it to the government. They're hopeful that the government will come back to them and say, hey, that's really important stuff. Let's do this, that, and the other. They don't hear anything. They don't hear anything back. Now, that's not to say that nobody's doing anything with them, but I really, knowing the volume of that information, I have a tremendous suspicion that a lot of that information never really gets seen. It happened decades ago when during the time frame of the BCCI matter, there was a parallel investigation called Operation Polar Cap, and that had to do with a company that was falsely reporting purchases and sales of precious metals and depositing huge amounts of cash that was being reported in currency transaction reports. And oftentimes what you see, and what I saw in that matter, was as far as the reporting by the banks were concerned, it wasn't being seen. It was only really addressed because of undercover work that was actually being done in the drug world, identifying this company. And the reports, unfortunately, were not being looked at. I'm kind of an egghead DEA agent. Okay, I'm a dot the I, cross the T. Right. My major is in. I graduated with a BA in Business Administration, Finance, and had a lot of accounting. And so these forms were important to me. When I worked at DEA, I would get in touch with FinCEN and I would ask them, listen, these are the zip codes in my area. I want any suspicious activity reports that relate to my zip code. I want any, and I could give them all different types of criteria. But I hate to say it, but I think I was possibly one of the few who were doing that. A lot of the time was being spent by the offices focusing on more of the street level, and that's important work too. Sure. It's violence in our community that has to be addressed. It's something that I think we should be supporting our local law enforcement offices with, but I really feel as though that we need to get in a position of looking at the big picture. We need to look at these big movements of funds. I wrote a white paper that is on my website about my view of what law enforcement could be doing and should be doing that, in my opinion, they're not doing, and that it could be done on a global basis and could really make a difference. Nobody's called me to sit down with them to talk about that.
Oh, 60 Minutes didn't call you up, Bob, right?
Well, I was more hoping that somebody from the government might be interested in talking about strategy. But unfortunately, I didn't get any phone calls about that. And there's a lot that can be done, a lot more that should be done. I'm hoping that the article that I wrote, the work that was done by BuzzFeed and ICIJ, I hope that it gets the attention of the Inspector General's office and Congress, so that people will take a clear, a very focused look to make sure that we don't just have a system based on names, a SAR system. We have a system that actually produces meaningful information, meaningful results, gets meaningful resources applied to it, and has meaningful outcome. I just don't think there's any part of that meaningful aspect out there that I see that makes it obvious that the right thing's being done with this stuff.
And you, since you mentioned since you came out with the article, since the 400 journalists, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists came out with, BuzzFeed came out with this, you're not aware of any movement, as you just said, from either government or from any major news outlets that said, "Wow, we got to do something on this." You're not aware of that at this point.
Well, the FinCEN files, which was a series of articles that were written by the BuzzFeed and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, are just tremendously informative. Your listeners can find them just by Googling FinCEN, FINCEN files. and they'll see that there are articles all over the world that have been written where investigative journalists took the information that was in the data that they had and applied gumshoe work, went and knocked on doors, went behind the paper, and uncovered a lot of very clear information that shows that this stuff should have been followed up on. It should have been followed up on very aggressively. So it is out there. There's no doubt about that. The only thing that I know that that FinCEN came out, their general counsel came out to say, was that this information, sharing this with the public, could undermine national security, harm ongoing investigations, endanger the safety of witnesses, and chill the efforts of an otherwise spirited participation of institutions in the SAR process. I think the exact opposite, because I think this work that was done by these journalists establish a bar of accountability, which hopefully people who have the responsibility of oversight will take a close look at and make sure that the concerns that appear as a result of this reporting, that number one, banks are, for the most part, belatedly, because I think I forgot to mention this, many of the SARs that were filed that I looked at were filed 5 years after the transactions occurred, because publicity came out about focused investigations relative to that particular movement of capital through the Baltic countries, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. That is kind of for the Russians. That's kind of their Grand Cayman Islands, their Panama, and so bad enough that they were filed late, very late in some instances. But if nothing is being done with this information, either we are wasting our time doing this, which I don't think we are, or we just need to make sure that everybody's doing their job. The banks file and say, gee, it's illicit activity. At what time should they ring the bell and go, you know what? I'm not going to allow our institution to be used by a bunch of crooks. Close those accounts. I hear a lot of bankers using an excuse. They go, well, sometimes the government doesn't want us to close an account because they know that they can follow the money as long as we keep putting in these suspicious activity reports.
They're doing God's work.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, there may be some times when the government feels that way, but you know what? Not every single bank fails to have an integrity backbone. Some clearly do. And I've seen times when an institution has said, I don't care if you want us to keep the account open. We're closing it. They're using our bank to facilitate their criminal activity. All that money that gets laundered so that they can then go out and buy illegal arms. They can do this, they can do that, they can do the other thing. We're facilitating it. And it's funny, when I was in BVI, now BVI, British Virgin Islands, is well known globally to be one of the havens where shell companies are mass produced and used around the globe, oftentimes in connection with illicit activity. And when I'm talking to the people at BVI who form these companies, and even government regulators, and they go, you watch, we only form the companies. Money doesn't come through the BVI. We simply sell the companies that later get abused by people who are moving illicit funds. To me, that's like me saying, I don't make weapons that are sold. I only make the silencers.
Right.
So, I have nothing to do with the fact that these people got whacked because I just make silencers. You can't kill somebody with a silencer. If you're making any piece of the puzzle,
you're part of the problem.
You're part of the problem.
Yeah.
Absolutely no doubt about it. But the good news is that now BVI has announced, as I've seen so many other countries, We are going to be making a public registry that makes transparent all beneficial owners in our companies. We're going to start that in 2023.
Oh, good. Right.
So I guarantee you, between now and 2023, something's going to happen, and it's not going to happen.
No.
So, and even if it did happen, the sophisticated minds,
the workarounds
of attorneys, and financial service providers, and other unfortunate criminal businessmen have easy ways of getting around this stuff. And it all goes back to the same thing. You catch them with their fingers in the cookie jar, they need to go to jail.
And that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line, Bob.
Pretty simple. Yeah, it's pretty simple. My idea, if anybody goes to read my white paper, because there are articles by me and articles about me in the Publication Center, but I think it was in January 2019 that I did the white paper. And the bottom line out of the white paper is just that. Until and unless we start putting people behind bars, this is never, ever going to change. It's mind-boggling that every year banks spend more and more, billions and billions and billions of dollars on compliance, but you don't see any increase in the identification and the seizure of illicit funds. So is what we're doing really making a difference? My plan in the white paper was that each nation would be tasked with their financial intelligence unit to identify the 10 most prolific money launderers operating and affecting within their borders. I don't care where the guy could live in Thailand, but if he's conducting transactions that are impacting the U.S. banking system and facilitating criminal activity, we need to come up with a top 10. Let's not worry about numbers 11 through 7,000.
We'll get them later. Let's go the top. Let's go the big guys.
Let's get the top 10. Yeah. Go get the big guys. Put them away for a really, really long period of time. Word will spread like wildfire, and you will see a difference in the mindset of those who feed off of illicit profits as money launderers.
So, Bob, here's a question I have for you. If President Trump is president at least until January 20th, 2021, if he loses the election, then we have President Biden. If let's say between now and the election, President Trump comes to you and says, "Hey, Bob, I really like what you're doing here. I like what you're saying. Okay, so Bob, what position do I put you in? And by the way, Bob, how fast can you get this thing turned around to the top 10, not only identifying, but snuffing these guys down?"
Well, it reminds me of a question that was put to the head of the CIA after 9/11, Tenet, when he was before Congress.
Yeah.
And he was asked under oath, how long, what's the problem? How did we miss this? And how long will it take us to correct this, to make sure that this will never, ever happen again? And his response was that we became too reliant on artificial intelligence, wiretaps, things along those lines. And we needed to massively increase our human intelligence. That means more spies, more undercover operations, more infiltrating organizations. And they asked him how long it would take. And I think his answer was an honest one. And he said 5 years. And everybody said, that's going to take too long. One of the problems we have in this day and age is that we are so used to the mouse that we click it and we get an instant answer.
Yeah, true.
I think in 6 months, you could get everybody, if you could get everybody on board in 6 months and get them to agree to the general program, maybe another year or so. And I think we could really start rocking and rolling by putting together a plan similar to the plan that I'd recommended in my white paper. The problem we have here is we need to have equal global cooperation. Because even though it's U.S. dollars, a lot of this stuff's going on in places where bad guys know there's no way you're going to get the information. Do you really think that we're going to be able to issue a subpoena to somebody in China?
Right.
And we're going to be able to get the information from them?
Good luck.
Good luck on that one. It's just not going to happen. No. And if it's going to be information that you want that's related to some oligarch, do you really think you're going to get that out of Russia? No way. So, what we need to do is we need to figure out, okay, who's going to play? Who's going to be with us in this boat and row in the same direction? And then we'll get around those other problems, but we've got to identify who to their core are committed to this. And let's see what resources they're going to put in. Let's see what kind of intelligence we can really cooperate with one another about. The massive amount of information that exists, even within our own databases, unfortunately, and this is the truth, doesn't necessarily get shared between our own U.S. agencies, let alone with other nations. There's got to be a big change in the mentality of the people who are operating within law enforcement. I don't know how many times. One time, I actually learned about two supervisors, one from DEA and one from Customs. They were both battling over the same case. Their surveillance guys were out there. The takedown was to occur. Who was going to get credit for it and who was going to take it led to a fist fight.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, we've got to be able to fully cooperate with one another. It happens even within agencies when it comes to really being able to get the kind of help you're hoping to get from a particular office. When they look at the information you have and what you're doing to try to put a case together, they may see that, handling it differently in their area is going to get them the stats that they really want. We've got to get that stat mentality out of there. We've got to get everybody saying, you know what? I'm in it for the greater good.
Right.
I'm in it for the public that I'm so proud gave me the opportunity and the responsibility to carry this badge and a gun and to do what it is that I can do for them. When I worked in the government, I never felt that I served properly unless I could come home and look my family in the eye and my friends in the eye and say, I did the best that I possibly could for you today, every single day. It's not about getting a promotion. It's not about getting the scalp that's going to wind up making you the hero. It's not about that. What it's all about is trying to bring people together to do the right thing. And I think it's possible. I think that we really can get that mentality going. But it takes a lot of people high up to buy in and then become a part of a movement to achieve these things.
Bob, educate our listeners on how they can follow you more closely, how they can get your book, how they can get your white paper, how they can learn more about FinCEN, how they can learn more about the movie The Infiltrator.
Sure. Well, the base place to go to is my website, Robert Mazur, Mazur.com. And there at the top, you'll see links to LinkedIn. I put a lot of a lot of information on LinkedIn, even beyond what's on my website, because I'm communicating with thousands of people who are connected with me, who are in the industry, who give good information and to whom I hope I share some information of value. So, I'd go to the website, I'd go to the LinkedIn page. As far as the Infiltrator movie is concerned, I know Amazon, surprisingly to me, just a week or so ago, made it like their featured movie of that week or month.
Awesome.
So yeah, and so it was getting a lot of looks, and
it's a great movie.
It is.
I'm biased, but it's a great movie.
And I'm so honored to have had Bryan Cranston play me in that movie. He is a very, very good and honorable guy. And he hasn't allowed Hollywood to affect his thinking. He was very respectful. He was very, very respectful of my wife and my children. He took the time to speak with them so he could really understand what our journey was like. And I think he did a very good job conveying that on the screen.
No, as I said, it's my favorite movie.
Great.
Yeah. And as I told you, I was in the plane flying, and your movie was on, and I'm watching it, and this guy sitting next to me starts watching and goes, wow, that's really a great movie, but it's really not real. I mean, that really didn't happen. I go, oh, no, it really happened. Oh, no, it was real. No.
But
I mean, it is a fantastic movie, and it's a movie, Bob, that has so many different aspects to it. So many different aspects, and it's so eye-opening in so many respects. But one of the things that it opens the eyes of people to, and this is what the guy was telling me in the plane. He goes, I knew people in our government did this, kind of laid it on the line. But he goes, he was kind of out there that I thought that was happening. But this movie really crystallizes what people in our government are willing to do and lay their lives on the line every minute of every day to protect us, to make our life, not just in our country, but around the world, better for everybody.
I've seen it firsthand. There are a lot of people, in my view, more dedicated and more efficient at what they do by far than I am, and they have really got a desire to be a part of making a difference. And as far as people who have made the maximum sacrifice, yesterday I was talking to one of my former colleagues at DEA because we're working on a project, and he was on the job 3 years and was with a young man. Willie Ramos was a DEA agent in McAllen, Texas. And at about 10:30 in the morning, they got two informants came and told them about somebody who had 300 pounds of marijuana they wanted to sell. And so quickly they were putting the thing together. Now, Willie was he was a prosecutor in Arizona. He went to the Border Patrol. He wanted to become a part of the U.S. Attorney's Office, but then got an opportunity to be a DEA agent. So he did that. He was on the job, I think, 3 years or less. And he was with my friend. And they said, well, Willie hasn't done a lot of undercover, and it'll be a good experience for him. And so Willie got in the car with two informants. The bad guy got in the car. Ultimately, it led to a situation where Willie started to do the takedown arrest, and the bad guy got his gun. And in the tussle, he got shot. My friend got in the car. He saw that the shirt that Willie was wearing showed that the bullet had actually entered in the shoulder area. So, he kept reassuring him, you're going to be all right. You're going to be all right. And they were close, very close. Their kids played together. These guys were growing as agents together. And what he didn't realize until a minute or a half a minute later was that in the tussle, Willie's shirt had gotten pulled down, and actually the bullet had entered right smack in the middle of his chest and had severed the main artery. And he died. And that story and many, many stories like it, unfortunately, can be told many times over. There is a federal law enforcement officers memorial museum in Washington, D.C., where literally thousands of officers are named. Any of your listeners who go, you can go to their website and see the amount of sacrifice that these brave people have given for us.
Yeah.
And it's something that we can't forget. I know it's easy to forget sometimes. In today's day and age, people are getting very understandably upset about some things that occur, but sometimes they lose sight of the fact that there's, in every walk of life, there's a very tiny portion of people who are bad.
Yeah,
Don't use that brush to paint them all. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to and do give their life for you every single day.
And I thank you, Bob, because you are also an individual to this day who does that exact same thing. And I thank you, Bob, for everything that you have done, are doing, and will do. And I want to thank you folks for joining us today. Robert Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, robertmazur.com. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time today.